Well, it's certainly my pleasure and the pleasure of my wife Nadya, who is with me here on the third row, to be your guests this evening. And yes, we are your missionaries to Ukraine and other nations of the Slavic world, we might say. That may be a strange designation for you. I'll explain it in a few moments if I can remember to do that. But first, let me just say how much we appreciate the opportunity to come and make this mission report this evening. But even more than that, how much we appreciate your support of our work. And that's just been a wonderful blessing since you began that support not all that long ago, but it was it was a surprise to us and a tremendous blessing, because I'm sure that you've been aware of mission needs a long time, and you are fully aware that missionaries are always running short of funds. That's just reality. And the reason for that, I mean, if they're doing their job right, they're running short of funds because the work is growing. And that's what happens. The work outruns the support. And then the missionary has to come back and try to bolster up the support in some way so he can go back and do more work as he goes along. So again, thank you so much for becoming our co-workers. We don't like to call our congregations that support us our supporting congregations. We like to call them our co-workers, our fellow missionaries, because you're just as much into this work as we are. It takes senders and it takes goers. They have to work together. And so you're doing your part, we're doing ours, and together we're getting the job done. And that's what I'm here to tell you about this evening. So if I can work this remote, there we go. We work in these countries right now. In time past, I was a missionary in other places. I went and spent 4 years in Beirut, Lebanon, and then came back and landed in Texas because I was lined up to start teaching at the Preston Road School of Preaching, where your missionary to India, Steve Snyder, was my student. And so that's where I met Steve, and he was a good student, I might add. He was one of the best we had. So I commend you for being a fellow worker with him, and I wish I could see him. It's been a long, long time. I might not even recognize him. Will and I met somewhere along the way. That was a long time ago, brother, and I didn't even recognize him. I thought one of the other men here was him when I walked in the door. And I told him, I thought you were short and more rotund than that, but you know how memory can fail you sometimes, and sometimes people can change, but it sure is good to see you again, Will, and I'm not sure if I ever met Betty before, probably not, but good to meet both of you as well, and all the rest of you that we met as we came into the building this evening. We came down from Brookville, Pennsylvania, where we had a tremendously full schedule yesterday. They are also another supporting congregation, fellow workers with us, and Randy Matheny is their preacher, and they put on a day yesterday called Family Day, and we were both speakers, the only speakers they had on that program. It was an all-day thing, a very intense thing, and then we were with them again this morning to do what I'm doing for you right now, as well as preach a sermon there in the worship hour. So anyway, Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland are where we're working now, but in the past, when I got back and spent some time in the U.S., I went to Ukraine first, then to Russia, and I spent 4 years planting a church in St. Petersburg, Russia, and in 4 years' time, they outgrew the need of a missionary. It became the largest congregation in St. Petersburg, and they didn't need me anymore. That's the goal of every missionary, to leave the work so that they don't need you anymore. By the way, let me back up to Beirut, Lebanon. I started a congregation there. That was in 1972. And when I left there in the mid-70s and came back to the USA, it was left with no Americans at all, and it still survives to this day. And that's thanks be to God's providence and devoted people who made up that congregation. So, back to the present. Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. You may not know much about Belarus. It's not well known, but I'll tell you a little about it as we go along. And so, anyway, I said I would say something about the Slavic name. This is what people of that Eastern Europe ancestry call themselves. They are Slavs, they say, and Slav means glorious people. So they named themselves the glorious people. And they look just about like us. You can't tell. If you walk side by side with a Ukrainian, you couldn't tell the difference between a Ukrainian and an American. We all look just alike. And by the way, Vladimir the Great, who is considered the first emperor of the Russian Empire, back in its empire days, when the headquarters was in Kiev, which is now the capital of Ukraine, Vladimir the Great, way back when, is my 31st great-grandfather. And so I have just a bit of Slavic blood. I calculated it one day. I figured out how much blood is in the normal human body and deducted half to his son, half again down to his grandson, until it got down to me. I have one drop left of his blood. So I want to tell you, it didn't help me to learn to speak Ukrainian any better having that one drop. And I've been real careful ever since not to prick my finger for fear that I'll lose that one drop even. But anyway, here we go on. I'm wasting too much time here. Look at this map. Everything that's in blue is all of Europe, and plus the addition of Turkey down there. That's Asia. Turkey's in the Near East, so Middle East, we say these days. So that's Asia. Ukraine is considered Europe. You see, it's right next to Big Red Russia there. And Belarus is just above Ukraine, if you can see that far from where you're sitting. I wish some of you way back yonder were a little closer, but maybe you have good eyesight. I don't know. I'd have trouble back there. Let's start with Ukraine. And I want to quote this scripture out of the New Testament. Paul was in a Roman prison. I've been there to see what they claim is the actual prison where he was, and it was a dungeon with only a hole in the ceiling to let people in and out. Here's what Paul wrote, Colossians 3:11, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised nor uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian. See that word Scythian? I put it in red. Slave nor free, but Christ is all in all. Who are the Scythians? That's the ancient name for the Ukrainians. These are the Ukrainians. So Paul knew about Ukrainians. I've got a map to show you coming up here. There it is, Scythia. And if you looked at a map of Ukraine today, you can see that a part of what that represents as Scythia is today's Ukraine. Part of it is not. Part of it goes further than the borders of today's Ukraine. But anyway, it's got the Black Sea right under it, and that's just an extension on the Mediterranean. And then over on the right side of your screen is the Caspian Sea, but we won't get into that. So Scythia. And if you were to ask a Ukrainian today, just any Ukrainian, who were your ancestors? Who were the ancient Ukrainians? They would say, well, we were the Scythi. And because they don't pronounce the TH in their language, it's F in their language, so they would say Scythi instead of Scythi, and the C is pronounced like a K, so there you go. They know they are the Scythians. And here's Ukraine kind of blown up, and now you can see Russia's in green to the right and to the somewhat down on the side of it, and Belarus is above it there. Ukraine is shaped in some way kind of like Texas, where we reside at the present time, though neither one of us are Texans. But that's the Black Sea you can see down there, and that peninsula sticking out down below, that's Crimea. Some of you are old enough to remember or have a good enough memory from your school days to know about the Yalta Conference that took place toward the end of World War II, when Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin all met in Yalta and decided, what are we going to do with Germany as soon as we conquer them? Because they were on the way down to defeat right then. And so they met at Yalta. I've been in that very spot where the famous photograph was taken, and I had Nadya take my picture. And so We've been there. But if you were to get in a boat right at the tip of that peninsula and go straight south, downward across the Black Sea, you would land on the northern shore of Turkey, exactly where Aquila, husband of Priscilla in the book of Acts, came from. So you see how close Ukraine is to what we call Bible lands. And in a way it is a Bible land, because the early church was operating in Ukraine, already expanded to Ukraine by the time Paul was writing his letters. But something about the war, you keep up with the news, I know that, and just as much as we do, so you're aware of this war that's been going on for 3 years now, and the two presidents represented there in the picture. It's exactly today 1,208 days of war that this has been going on, and it's a tragic event. I could show you thousands of pictures like I'm going to show you right now. This is a Ukrainian tank. You see the Ukrainian flag. It's blue and yellow there, representing the blue sky above the golden wheat fields that represent so much of Ukraine. They have some of the most fertile soil in the world. During World War II, Hitler sent trains in there, boxcars, and loaded up topsoil from Ukraine, took it back to Germany. And Ukrainians been wanting it back ever since. But anyway, look at that. Another Ukrainian tank and all these soldiers, and people's homes destroyed, and they wonder, where are we going to go now? And building after building. You can't see this, I know this, but this is 9 cities that are completely destroyed from Russian attacks on Ukraine. Nobody can live in these 9 cities any longer. They were decimated. And so the war goes on. When your house starts looking like that, just a pile of rubble with smoke coming up, you do what this woman is doing. You put what's left in some plastic bags, and you start going and looking for somewhere else that you can stay. And many people have no idea where they're going to stay, because refugees have been created by the millions. And look at this, totally destroyed city. Can you imagine what would happen to East Liverpool or Calcutta here if a Russian missile landed right in the middle of town? It would look something like that. So here's Ukraine now, looking at it from the war perspective. Everything in red is Ukrainian territory, but occupied by Russian forces. So they grabbed Crimea back in 2014, and they did it by a kind of a sneaky plan, as I would call it. They just got in there, a bunch of Russians got in there and started seeing people on the streets and saying, you can trade your Ukrainian passport in for a Russian passport. Would you like a Russian passport? And they just got all kinds of people to do this, and then they declared that Crimea was theirs. And their armed forces came in and stood outside Ukraine's military bases and said, come on out, or we're going to blow you out with gunfire. And Ukrainian forces gave up without a shot fired, and Russia took it over. And then they put it in their constitution that Crimea belongs to them. And now they say, well, it's ours because it's in our constitution. That would be like us deciding tomorrow that Mexico should be our 51st state. So we're just going to put it in our constitution that Mexico is the 51st state of the U.S., and that makes it ours, regardless of what the Mexicans have to think about that. That's what the Russians did to Ukraine. So look at all that. Now, you can see if your eyes are good enough, and then I guess there's a pointer on here. Uh-oh, I shouldn't have done that. I think I turned it off. There we go. There's probably a laser pointer on here, but I'm not sure where it is. But right up above the river, you see a river coming down there making a dog leg. You see the word Poltava there. That is our home base in Ukraine. So it's just on the eastern side of the big Dnieper River, which is like our Mississippi. And it's about a 4-hour car drive from the front lines of the battle over there where the red zones are. And so that's what we call home base in Ukraine. We have an apartment there. I'm going to tell you things about the congregation there. And but that doesn't mean that the war is only going on the east. Look at all this. Russia is sending those missiles and drones all over Ukraine, all the way from one end to the other. And I think of Ukraine as kind of like Texas. In fact, it's almost exactly the same size of Texas. If you were to chop off half of the Texas panhandle up there on the upper left side, take off half that panhandle, that's the size of Ukraine. And so it's the biggest European country, but it's small compared to the USA. Air raid sirens go off every night. Nadya's fixing to go at the end of this month. She flies out on the 29th, and she's going. There's no passenger air travel in Ukraine since the war started. She's going to fly into Warsaw, Poland, catch a train, go down to another Polish city where she catches the train that will go into Ukraine. And then she's got a whole day of travel on that train to get over to Poltava, where our base operation is. Well, more war pictures here. Russian drones. It's not only missiles, but drones. Look at this. Here's a drone. Look how big those drones are. And they do a lot of damage. A drone can take out a good hunk of a town. And you probably also heard in the news that Ukraine had a very significant attack on Russia. That surprised us even, because this was all secret. Somehow they smuggled in some drones like this. I doubt they were that big, but they got them in to the country in big, what we would call 18-wheelers, and somehow got them into the country and got them placed in different parts of Russia, and then they got them out and fired them off and destroyed more than 40 military aircraft out of the Russian Air Force. It must have shocked Russia to their boots. But since then, they've stepped up their attacks on Ukraine, and so Ukraine is paying a price for that as well. And here's more pictures to show you. It just goes on and on and on like this. They are especially targeting infrastructure like electrical installations and all that. Here's our Poltava city, and that is our church building. We were so blessed a number of years ago to buy this building. I had been driving past it for years. It was a restaurant that went out of business, and every time I drove past it, I'd look over there at it, because it's on a 6-lane major boulevard, one of the biggest streets in the city of Poltava. It'd be like St. Clair Avenue, and 3 lanes on each side. Every time I drive past it, I would think, wouldn't it be wonderful to have that building as our church building? And we finally saw that it came up for sale, and we were able to buy that entire building for $100,000, and it was a real bargain. So of course, that was American money that did it. I went around to churches and said, we've got this golden opportunity to get this wonderful building. And brethren came through for us, and we were able to get it. And the sign over the door, you can just barely see it there, says Cerkva Hristova, which is Church of Christ in the Ukrainian language. This is what we look like over there in wintertime. Kind of like winter up here, yes. But I don't know if you wear those bill caps anymore or not, but you see a lot of that, and fur caps over there. Here's what we look like in spring and fall, maybe. There's a better look at the sign, by the way, and that's the front door into the meeting place. But here's an attack, going back to the war now, that Russia perpetrated on the city of Poltava last year, 3rd of September, and they killed 55 people, wounded nearly 350, and they targeted a military school on the north end of town. Fortunately, that was quite far from our building. Our building's on the southwest side of town, and they targeted that on the north side of town. But just about a week ago, there was a significant Russian attack on the city of Poltava. They targeted a small military installation that was just 1 mile from our church meeting place, And we had the place full of people. Bible studies were going on. When the Russian missile hit, it just shook that building, rattled all the windows. People wondered if they were going to be dead. And that's what goes on in daily experience these days in Ukraine. So I had a graphic up there that said air raid sirens go off every night. When Nadya gets back over there, she's going to be texting me and telling me they're still going on every night. And when they go off, of course, everybody wakes up and you wonder, are they bombing our building or what are they doing? And so it's a terrible situation. Here's, by the way, some pictures of that military school that they took up. That's what they did to the building. They completely destroyed the building, and there's the headline of it written in the Ukrainian language. And another picture. But look at this, just building after building after building turned into rubble. How does that affect the Lord's church? Well, we had rolling blackouts, and here's the inside of our church building, and Bible study going on, and all we could do was put a lantern on the table because there was no electricity. Here the lantern was put in the floor and the people gathered around. Here is another rolling blackout day. And here's yet another one. This one during daytime, so some light could come in through the window. And this one during daytime. This is, I think, Sunday morning worship right here. And those rolling blackouts were just, it was difficult to deal with them. It was a struggle, but people kept coming. People kept filling the building. But finally, some brethren here in the U.S. put up some money for us to buy generators like this. And we got several of them so that whenever the rolling blackout comes, the generator kicks in now and we've got lights. And so here's a view of what it looks like with lights on. And here is a Sunday morning assembly in Poltava, Ukraine. Now, folks, this building is not near as big as yours. I would say the room you're looking at here, I may miss my guess, but it's certainly not bigger than half of the seating of this auditorium. It's probably more like a third of the seating of this auditorium. But every time the church meets these days, it's standing room only. We fill every seat. And every week, more than 200 people are coming through our doors for our Bible studies and our worship. That's how good the work is going in Poltava, Ukraine, that you're supporting. Look, all these are Poltava. Here's another one. It was a blackout day, I believe. And this young man up front here is one of our preachers that we brought in for the day to deliver the sermon. Here's Nadya teaching her ladies and handing out Bibles. A lot of these people are not Christians at all. The vast majority of the people you're seeing here are not Christians. They're coming in to our building for our Bible studies, to learn about the Bible, to learn about the church. They are also in need of humanitarian aid, and we give them that help. But they're not there just for the groceries that we provide, the food and the medicines and things like that, but they are sincerely interested in the Bible, and some of these people express their appreciation very profusely, and some of them have never held a Bible in their hands in their life. I met people in Ukraine who had never even seen a Bible. Can you imagine that? I remember an occasion one time, this is many years ago, it was 1994, and I was staying temporarily in the home of a Christian Ukrainian family because I didn't have an apartment of my own in that place where I was working. And the lady of the house, she said, I've invited a friend to come over for a Bible study. Can you teach her the Bible, give her a lesson around 2 o'clock this afternoon? I said, sure. And she came in and she sat down on the couch, and my first words to her were the words I give to everyone on such occasion after I say hello and introduce myself and so forth. My first question is, do you believe in God? If they say yes, if they say no, I know I've got to give them a reason to believe in God. I had a young man once, I asked him, do you believe in God? He said, no, I'm an atheist. And so I said, okay, then I know what I need to talk about with you. And after an hour and a half of study with him, he said, I'm no longer an atheist, and before he walked out the door. And I'll tell you what I told him if I have time later, but I don't want to take time away from something else. But anyway, this particular woman that I'm talking about, I said to her, do you believe in God? She said, yes. I said, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? She said, yes. I said, did you know? Here's my third question I always ask. Did you know that Jesus lived before he was born? And everybody in Ukraine that I've ever asked that question to has said no in answer to it. They had no idea about the pre-existence of Jesus. So that's where I begin. How that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son by sending him from heaven to earth. He was heaven's missionary to earth. And so I said to this woman, I want to tell you something about Jesus. I didn't tell her what I just said to you. I just said, okay, I want to tell you something about Jesus. First, I want to read it out of the Bible. In fact, I want you to read it out of the Bible. And she was holding this Bible. She had never held one in her life. It had page numbers at the bottom. I had one just like it in my hand. I said, turn to page such and such. And that page such and such was where John 3:16 is located. And I said, look for a verse numbered 16 and read it out loud. And she started reading, Ibetak Vazlubil Bog Mir. She's reading in the Russian language. I gave her a Russian Bible. Ibetak Vazlubil Bog Mir, for God so loved the world, что he отдал Sina his only begotten Son. She went on, I won't trouble you with the Russian word, but she started reading it, and every line she started faltering in her voice, and I was looking intently at her, and tears popped out of her eyes and started rolling down her face. By the time she got to the last word of the verse, she was visibly shaking, holding that Bible. That's how much John 3:16 impresses people that have never heard it in their life. Isn't that amazing? You know, we know here in this country, John 3:16 is the most famous verse in the Bible, but it's the most famous verse in the Bible anywhere in the world, I'll guarantee you. And so here's Nadya handing Bibles out to people who never held one in their hands before. Some of them had never seen one. And Nadya's teaching these classes. I got to brag a little on Nadya. She'll be embarrassed and tell me later, but when she's working this here, as she's going to be doing at the end of the month, she's typically teaching 4 or 5 lessons a day, 6 days a week. You multiply that, that's as many as 30 lessons a week, and she has to get those lessons up and deliver those lessons to all these people. I wonder sometimes when she ever has time to sleep, but that's her typical schedule when she's working in Poltava, Ukraine. And they come in, they keep coming in, and they do this and get all these studies. But we, again, let me say, we help them out with humanitarian need. I'm going to be showing you pictures of that, but I want to pause here on this one first. And the man in the middle with the, I think, blue shirt on, is one of our beloved preachers in Ukraine. He is one of our preachers in Poltava, Ukraine. He used to be in a different city. We kind of moved him around over the years wherever he was needed the most, and he was willing to go anywhere. I would tell him, can you go and work in such a city? We have 2 Christians there and no church. And he would say, sure, I can go there. And he would go do there and build up a church and plant a church and get it going. And just a wonderful man. His name is Vladimir. You would say Vladimir. It's actually pronounced Vladimir. Put the accent on the right syllable, you know, in order to make it sound good to them. Anyway, we call him Volodya for short because in Ukrainian the name is Volodymyr instead of Vladimir, so Volodya becomes the short form of the name for anybody Russian-speaking or Ukrainian-speaking. He's doing the preaching here on this occasion, and some other brothers are there, one of which is a preacher and another is not. And here's a bunch of them all with a picture together, and the young man on the left is a Ukrainian, he was a Ukrainian boy that we helped some dear friends in Texas adopt, and him and his younger brother were both adopted by this Texas family, and they became Christians here in the USA. And then we started working on their sister in Ukraine. Nadya talked to her and her husband a whole night long. I mean, they didn't have any sleep, none of them, the entire night. And by the time morning came, they said, we're ready to become Christians. And so now that family has become Christians. The rest of these in the picture here, most of them are preachers, but I'm going to focus in on another one in a minute and tell you what he is. Meanwhile, I said we work humanitarian aid. We give all this help, this benevolent help to these needy people who were driven out of their homes with these Russian attacks, had to just flee and go and find some place to live, not knowing where, had no job, no way to sustain themselves. So naturally, the Lord's church steps in and helps those needy. Do good unto all men, especially those of the household of faith, Paul said, and that's what we do. So we go down to the stores, we buy all these provisions, we organize them, put them in boxes, and one of our brothers, he's pictured here on the far right, owns a car. He's the only car-owning member of the Poltava congregation. When I arrived in Ukraine, that was 1993, I think only about 5% of the adult population had ever driven a car. And it was just beyond their means. They couldn't afford it. I met a college professor in Kiev. He said to me in English, a man knew English, he said, I own a car, but I can't afford to drive it because my salary as a professor is only $10 a month. Well, I think if your salary is $10 a month, that's right. You cannot afford to drive a car. But anyway, this brother has a car. So they're gathering up all these provisions, and here he is in the front here, and they're putting these things into his car. I think, yeah, there it is with the trunk open. They're about to get it in there. And we take it down to our building. That's the back side of our building. And needy people come and we give out these provisions. But they come and stay for Bible classes. So here they are, having just exited a Bible class, and now they've got some food to sustain them so they won't starve to death until they can come back another time. Here's another picture of the same thing. And it's an ongoing process. We never have a Bible study without some food on hand. And it's just a reality of life in that part of the world now. And so this is a big operation. A brother up in Brookville, Pennsylvania, asked me yesterday during our family day, when one of my closing speech where I had some questions and answers, and he said, what do you do with the funds that we send? And I said, well, we don't buy buildings with them. If we need to buy something, I go around and raise that money from churches and tell them we need to buy a building. Your money goes basically for two things, evangelism and benevolence. That's it, evangelism and benevolence. And we support a number of preachers out of those funds that you send. So, preaching the gospel never stops. And look at this. I said, standing room only, every time we meet, there's another picture. Look at them standing in the back there. They didn't have any seats, some of them. Fortunately, we have a building that used to be a restaurant, which means it has a really long, nice kitchen, and that's where Nadya is preparing all that food to hand out, to give these people something so they won't starve to death, and they can come back and keep learning about their way to heaven. Here's the Volodya, the Vladimir that I mentioned earlier, standing in that picture, our beloved brother. He was born exactly 20 years after I was on the very same day. And so we never forget each other's birthdays. And it's always a competition to see who can say happy birthday first to the other. But he's a wonderful man. We brought him into Poltava because we needed someone there after the war started. Well, first COVID hit. And we had to get out of the country. We couldn't even get back in the border for a while. They closed the border, and we just got out the day before they closed the border to international travel. And then after COVID, then the war started. And so we've been having to adjust how we work this mission field in light of those two things. And so Volodya here, we brought him in to work with the church, and there he is in blackout times teaching a Bible lesson, and a lot more views like that. and I could just keep going on and on. But finally, well, I get down to this man. His name is Vadim. I like that name. It's short, easy to say, it sounds good. He just finished 2 years of education in the Bear Valley School of Preaching's Extension School in Ukraine. They've had that school there for about, I think it's now about 25 years. And he is one of the recent graduates, just finished in this spring term. We brought him into Ukraine and we're supporting him part-time while he was finishing up school, and now he's graduated and now he's become our full-time worker. So I'm looking for more funds to support Vadim. We're short of that. We don't have it on hand, and so hopefully we can keep that going, because we need Vadim there as well as Volodya. There's too many people for one preacher to handle. Can you imagine one preacher trying to handle 200 non-Christians coming through the door? I mean, how would that work? So there's Vadim and his wife Oksana, and here's the man that was in the picture. I said, I'm going to tell you more about this man in a little bit. And so he was in that first picture standing by the young man that had been adopted. This man is also a Vladimir, who we also call Volodya for short. And when he was converted, we advertised a Bible correspondence course. This was back in about 1994 or 5. And he saw the ad in the newspaper, responded, and we sent him the correspondence course. And then when he finished it, I make sure those courses are short, because I don't want a lot of time to go by before I go and call on him with a completion certificate. So we went and called on him. He became a Christian. He had a little girl about 2 or 3 years old. She was just a toddler at the time. He started bringing her to worship. He brought her every single time he came. His wife would have nothing to do with Christianity. She was totally stone cold hearted. Wouldn't even listen to anything. He would bring the little girl. And she grew up to become a Christian. That was a thrill for me to baptize her into Christ eventually. And then she eventually met a boy and fell in love, and she wouldn't even think about marrying him until he became a Christian, and we converted him too. And now he's been drafted into the Ukrainian army. He's been sent to the front lines, and we're worried about his welfare, his stability, his life. He could lose it at any time. A lot of lives have been lost in this war. But this man, he was a dairy farmer. Basically, what he knew was how to feed cows and how to clean up after him, working on a huge dairy farm in Ukraine. And eventually, we got him off that dairy farm and put him onto support, because we needed help in the Poltava church, and he became a kind of a jack of all trades, and we started training him spiritually so that he began, he started with Bible readings, and then he started with teaching classes, and then he started leading singing. He has a really good ear for music. He cannot read the notes. He doesn't know music to read it. There are some Americans like that too. But he has a perfect ear for sound, and he even taught himself how to play the keyboard. So he can lead singing and do a real good job of it, and then we trained him to preach. And so now he can do everything that the church needs, but he's not really considered a preacher, because that's just something he does when he needs to fill in for somebody else. But this man is just such a wonderful asset to our Poltava congregation. Back to Nadya again. We have kids there too. Look at these children's Bible storybooks and these kids' classes that take place. And these have been printed up in Ukrainian languages, and they're just like you have available here for your children, if there are some in this congregation. And over there, we have a shortage of baptistries, so guess what we use? You can see it in the picture. Bathtubs will work. For most people. I once baptized a woman who weighed about 350 to 400 pounds in a bathtub. Now, you may wonder how that was possible. Well, I'll tell you, I had 2 secrets. First of all, I asked around and I put her in the biggest bathtub we could find of any of our members. And then secondly, I filled the water all the way up to the top. And then I got a helper, and I said, I want you down at the feet to make sure they don't come out of the water. and I'm going to watch the head up here, and then make sure it doesn't come out of the water. And then the middle part, which was above the water line, here's how I took care of that. One arm did a tidal wave of water right across the body and immersed her into Christ. I will have to confess that most of the water in the bathtub ended up on the floor from that operation, but she was baptized into Christ. And here's this lady. She was one of these refugees coming into our meetings and for our Bible studies. There she is. There's her husband. And by the way, he's the one who has the car. They are the ones. And so that was a great day to have them come into Christ. Now we're going to go to another city. This city is Kamyansk. It used to be called Dnipro-Dzержinsk. First time we tried to say that word, we Americans, came out something like Nebuchadnezzar. Anyway, a passport control officer heard that one time. He kind of looked and he said, "Oh, just go on." So, Dnipro-Dzержinsk is named after the Dnieper River. That was that big river I showed you on the map. D-N-E-P-R. Can you imagine how to pronounce that with no vowel between the D and the N and no vowel between the P and the R? Ask Nadya to say it for you afterwards and she'll tell you. Anyway, that was named after that river, Dnipro-Dzержinsk, and Dzerzhinsky was a bigwig communist leader back in Bolshevik Revolution days. But guess what? You can't find a communist over there anymore. They're all gone. They're bad news. They don't want communism anymore. So they started purging all these communistic related names out of their city names, their street names, and so forth. And so Dnipro-Dzержinsk became Kamyansk, the stone city, because lots of stone outcroppings of rocks around there. Here's the Left Bank Church. And we bought this facility. It's the basement of a high-rise apartment building, 16,000 square feet. We bought it for $16,000 some years ago. And that was a tremendous bargain. We've been renovating it ever since. It's more territory than we need for the church right now, but as we need more rooms, we work on them like you can see in these pictures. And this room in particular was a real treat for the ladies because it became that room, and they appreciated that much more than the room that it had been. So now going across the river, right bank Kamyansk, I'm going to have to tell you just a story before I go on here. So I was with a campaign group. We had 12 of us, and we went in there to plant the church on the right bank of this city. The left bank church had already been started about 6 months earlier. We went in to start the right bank church on the other side of the river, and I was their first speaker, and we rented a civic auditorium, a house of culture they call them, and it was about the size of this auditorium. It could hold 400 people. And I want to tell you, every seat was filled. People wanted to come and see what these Americans looked like. This was back in 1994. The Soviet Union ended in December 1991, and I got in there within a year and a half, and then this is the next year. And here we are, spring of 94, starting this congregation, and I was their first speaker. So that was a wonderful opportunity, and we went to the superintendent of schools and said, "We're here to teach Bible in your city. Could we possibly teach Bible in one of your schools?" She said, "You can teach Bible in every one of our schools. I'll even set up a schedule for you." And we started going around doing that. I got into one school, and the principal said, "If you could stay here and teach Bible in our school," this is a public school, folks, "if you could do it for a year, I'll provide you an apartment to live in and a car and a driver." I said, "Well, that would be wonderful, but I've got other places to go. I can't stay and just here and do that." But folks, that was public schools. We couldn't even lead a prayer in a public school here in America, and the former Soviet Union wants Bible taught in their schools. Isn't that amazing? You can't do it these days. They finally decided that wasn't the right thing to do, but that was a golden opportunity back then. We went to call on the mayor and told him, we're here in your city teaching Bible. He said, oh, glad to have you. And while we're talking, and his door was open to the corridor outside, and the chief of police walked by, and he saw him. He said, oh, Larry, come in here and meet these people. And here comes the chief of police. He shakes hands all around, and I told him, we're here teaching Bible in your city. He said, oh, wonderful. And if anybody gives you any trouble about it, you come and see me, and I'll take care of them. I said, okay, thanks a lot. Nobody did give us any trouble, thankfully. This young man here in the picture was the little brother of a man that I converted in that city. I stood up to preach. It was on a Sunday afternoon. We got use of this. It was a civic building. We got use of it in the afternoon. I had just stood up. I was on ground level down here, and started to preach when in the door walked this strapping, muscular young man. And I said, come right on in, have a seat anywhere. And I waited for him to sit down. I said, I was just about to begin my sermon, and so I got a translator to translate for these people, and he heard his first Christian sermon. And afterwards, I said, I would like to talk to you at length, but we just rented this building for a short time, and the time is almost expired. Is there somewhere nearby we could go and have a talk? He said, there's a donut shop across the street. I said, good. I hope there wasn't too many policemen in that donut shop. But anyway, we went over there and had a talk. To make a long story short, I found out from this young man, he said, my last job was an enforcer for the mafia. And I said, an enforcer for the mafia? He said, yeah, they thought I betrayed them. They beat me nearly to death. I ended up in the hospital for 6 or 7 weeks, and he said, I decided that's no way for a person to live his life. I want to be done with that kind of life, and I want to turn my life around. And I saw your notice on the public bulletin board down on the corner, and I said to myself, I need to go and see these people. And I said, you came to the right place. We converted him, the mafia enforcer, and this is his little brother, gospel preacher now, on the right bank of Kamyanske. The mafia enforcer himself was the preacher first until he moved off to Kiev, and then now we've got his little brother Ilya, that's Elijah in the Ukrainian language, and he's doing a great job. He was 8 years old when older brother Eric started taking him around and with him as he would preach the gospel. He became a preacher right away. But folks, mafia enforcers make good preachers. Look for some of them, and you may be surprised what they can do. Think about the Apostle Paul, the ace persecutor of the Lord's church, became the great Apostle Paul. You don't count anybody out on who you're trying to convert. And so little brother Ilya here was 8 years old. I was teaching him Bible. He's now the preacher on the right bank of Kamyanske and doing a great job. They don't have their own building there. They have to borrow a denominational building and get use of it in the afternoon. So sometimes they have Bible studies in homes like this, sometimes in other places, sometimes out on a veranda. But here's what a Sunday morning assembly looks like there, and that's putting everybody up front, keeping in mind this is somebody else's building, and they just get the use of it for a period of time. But humanitarian aid used there as well. And this young man, he was 15 years old when the youth of this congregation, now this is the congregation that I preached that first sermon for with those 400 people present. We got that going and eventually converted a lot of people. And the youth of the congregation converted this fellow when he was a 15-year-old boy. He's from Azerbaijan, and those people are Turkish in their ethnicity. And so he became a Christian. He was a Muslim. They converted a Muslim boy. And he became a Christian, and within a year he said, I want to be a gospel preacher. And so I sent him off to the Bear Valley School. He got his education. We started supporting him and have been ever since. And he's just doing a bang-up job at that. Now, Plaveshna is a village, and this was a work planted by former mafia enforcer Eric. Again, he said, let's go out to my village where my grandma lives, and my mother is out there too. And so we went out there and to see if we could plant the church. We had put circulars all around in homes. People came, and some women came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for bringing the church to us." She said, "We have never had a church of any kind in this village." And we started the Lord's Church there, and it's been going ever since. Lots of people have been converted. These scenes right here are in that village. They took Grandma's house and converted it into a meeting place. Sometimes they meet outside when the weather is good, and they hold Bible camps, usually several weeks long every summer, because there's a river nearby. It's a wonderful place to have a camp. This young lady next to Nadya here, her name is Tanya. And I knew her when she was a teenage girl, and her husband when he was a teenage boy, and eventually they got together and started a wonderful family doing great work. I wanted to picture them because they're great workers in that congregation. Here they are holding the Ukrainian flag, a lot of the youth. And some baptism pictures. The river, the big Dnieper River, is dammed up at Kamyanskaya and forms a lake 5 miles across. When you travel from one side to the other, that's a huge lake, but it's actually a river. And guess what one of the favorite songs is in Ukraine? Out of our book, "Shall We Gather at the River?" And they gathered at the river so many times to witness people being baptized into Christ. Like this spot right here has been one of our favorite places to do it. And now, Zaporozhye, I've got to hurry along. I'm talking fast, folks. If you don't mind hanging over just a few short minutes, I'll try to get to the end of it pretty quick. But this is another city, Zaporozhye. It's down in Scythian territory, the ancient Scythian territory, where those people lived that Paul was referring to. And we have a church. I sent Eric, the ex-mafia enforcer, down there to start that work. I said, "We have one woman that we know of who's a Christian in Zaporozhye. Would you go down there and start a congregation with her?" He said, "Okay." He went down there. And folks, that thing grew to a big congregation. And we met a man in a hospital who was a drug addict. And we converted him. And then he wanted to become a gospel preacher. So he got his 2 years training in preacher training school. And then Eric went on to other places, and convert Yuri became the preacher. And we were teaching refugees like this that came into the city, giving them Bibles, giving them provisions. And now, these days, Yuri and wife Yulia have gone on to Warsaw, Poland, because Russia came into Zaporozhye with their military forces, and they more or less had to get out, and they went to Warsaw, and there they are. Yuri, the former drug addict, the convert of Eric, the former mafia enforcer. What about stories like that? Isn't that something? It's just amazing what you can do with the gospel of Christ. Yuri is doing a tremendous job in Warsaw, and that's part of our work now. And there's his wife, Yulia, with Nadya in the middle, and Nadya spends time with them. And so here's Yuri up front, and here he is on a Sunday, and most of these people in these pictures are refugees from Ukraine, and he's speaking here in Ukrainian language to these people. But he also learned how to speak Polish in the 2 or 3 years that he's been there now. And so he can do it either way, whatever he needs to do. But that work is really going great. And Nadya's been working along with them. And we help support this preacher. And there he is with Nadya in the front row. And there's his wife again. But the work got to be too much for them, so we got another man. Here he is right here. Sergei Nosov is his name, and his wife Victoria. And he also has been through one of our preacher training schools, came out of Ukraine, escaped the country, got over to Warsaw, and now he's working. There she is again with Nadya, and they're working with lots of kids like that. He's working with Yuri here as gospel preachers for this congregation. This is a big public pool they got to use. There's the bathtub method of doing it. And here is Yuri and Sergei both together baptizing this woman into Christ in an outdoor wading pool. Folks, you use whatever baptistry you can find, and you get it done one way or the other. Humanitarian aid again, there they are handing it out, there they are getting it out of the car and doing lots of work, sometimes meeting in tents like that. There's Gary and Nadya, that's from a recent trip, and she'll be seeing him again very shortly. So there is one of our dear Ukrainian members, and medicines. I wonder, maybe I'll focus on that just a bit. You can buy medicine that historically we could just go into any pharmacy, buy any medicine we want. You don't need a prescription, just buy it. They sort of cracked down on that now. They've decided that wasn't a good idea, but for years we could do that. And we got all these medicines, and of course Nadya is very astute on this, and she knows what not to get and what could be dangerous, but we give the medicines out to people who need them and who know what medicines they need. Just a couple of words about another young man, especially one, Nazar. He's working with a youth man named Ilya in two cities, Kramatorsk and Brovary. There's Nazar. He's 25 years old. His father's a preacher. His grandfather's a preacher. And we have supported both of them, and he's third-generation preacher in Ukraine. Humanitarian aid, again, a big part of their work. They're working in this town of Brovary. It's a smaller congregation. They've got this rented facility. And here's a recent convert. Her house was attacked by Russian airstrike. It completely destroyed the home except for one room where she's still hanging on in one room. And Nazar went to her and taught her the gospel and baptized her in that less than clean looking water. And but that's all right. The Jordan River where Jesus was baptized doesn't look any cleaner than that. And by the way, yesterday was the 50th anniversary of my baptizing my oldest two kids, girls, in the Jordan River. And I did it at the very spot where Jesus was baptized. I found the spot by looking at the picture on the baptismal certificate and trying to match it. But anyway, it must have been close. And there is Nazar with the convert, so happy to become a Christian. He's just doing a wonderful job, and the youth man, Ilya, working along with him. Belarus, I just got to say a word. It's a separate country. There it is, and they're buddies with Russia. They think alike. They're dictators in both countries, Putin in Russia, and this president in Belarus, who's been president even longer than Putin has. They're kind of presidents for life, and that means they're dictators. But there's only a small amount of work, Christian work being done in their country because it's so difficult. They would not tolerate an American missionary in their country. There's one congregation in Minsk, and there's this one right 10 miles from the Russian border that some of our converts started. This young man, Igor, we baptized him in 2016, and along with his wife, and within 2 months he said, I'm ready to start preaching and establish a church here. And we started supporting him to do that, and he got the church going, and there they are with some of their family. There's Igor and Katya, his wife, and that's our story from Belarus. But I want to end with this. These are only physical locations. In addition to all of that, we have daily prayer meetings and weekly worship 6 days a week online. Every day except Saturday, it goes on, and we've been able to connect people in 6 different countries. That's a shot of me sitting in my home office in Arlington, Texas, holding a Russian Bible, and here is Igor in Belarus holding a Russian Bible and looking at my picture on his phone while we're having our meeting going on. And there's Nazar doing the same thing, delivering a lesson online, and these fellows participate all the time. So that is why we can keep that work going from afar, in spite of the war, because we're using modern technology and getting the job done. The refugee crisis, of course, is, I'll go back to that and kind of end with that, but Ukraine's doing its best to defend its people, but if time goes on very much longer, they're going to run out of men. They're losing men. Lots of men are being killed on the battlefield. They'll eventually go down. And folks, if it goes down, here's the sad story to that. If Russia gets Ukraine, all the congregations in Ukraine will have to go underground. They will not be allowed to exist in any noticeable way. All missionaries will not be able to enter the country unless they can sneak in somehow on a tourist visa. And they won't tolerate it. They won't even tolerate the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It'll have to be the Russian Orthodox Church. And we have more members of the Lord's Church in Ukraine than all the rest of Europe put together. Can you imagine that? And we've done it just since the Soviet Union ended in 1991. That's why it will be a travesty if Russia gets Ukraine. Please pray in your daily prayers that this will not happen. What can we do? Pray. And pray every single day. Support Ukrainian evangelism. Help feed the hungry like we're doing in all of these efforts. And support the outreach to displaced people like Nadya and Volodya are doing here in this modular city that was installed by the city authorities of Poltava. Millions have fled, millions more are trying, and there they went in that direction, but they want to go back home, and we hope that they will live to see the day. Thank you so much for your wonderful attention to this presentation, but I want to end with encouraging anyone who needs to respond to the gospel to do so right now. We're going to sing this invitation song that was announced, and who knows, maybe someone here this evening needs to respond. If there's someone who's not a Christian but thinking about it, why not make tonight the night? I responded myself by stepping out of my seat and coming down the aisle one Sunday evening to the song, "Oh, Why Not Tonight?" And you could do the same. If you have belief in your heart, if you have repentance in your soul, if you can put a confession of Jesus on your lips, you can be baptized into Christ this very evening and be on your way to heaven. Or if you've already done that and things aren't right between you and God, why not let some brothers and sisters pray for you? Why not make it known? Just let us know your need. Meet us at the front if you have any of these needs, and we'll try to help you as we can. Let's stand and sing the song.